Hey, what's up guys? This is Dave. Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share how you can set up passwordless SSH to your server. So obviously, if you're going to run any kind of application online on a VPS such as AWS or Linode or DigitalOcean or anything else, you're going to constantly be remotely logging in onto the server, either to run some routine maintenance or do some troubleshooting or whatever it is. And I want to just guide you how you can simplify that process. So with SSH, you have two main methods of authentication. One is password based, which is sort of the default way of logging onto an SSH server, and then the other one is passwordless based. So passwordless based authentication uses public key cryptography to authenticate the client and the server. Okay, so how does SSH work? SSH works basically two ways. One, you have server authentication, and in this case we start off by verifying the SSH host. The SSH host has to prove that it is who it claims to be in order to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. And then you have user authentication, and in this case the user or the client has to prove that they have permission to access the server. With user authentication, now this is where you have the password-based authentication that uses the PAM module, which is the password-based way of authenticating the user, and then the passwordless key pair option. Okay, now you need to know two files when it comes to SSH authentication. One is called the known hosts file. Now the known hosts file stores SSH server keys on the client machine, and typically it can be found under SSH and then known hosts. It's right there, and if you cut to it, it sort of has all these it has all the host keys of all the servers that you've SSH'd into. Okay, this file here is stored on your client machine, and then the other file that you need to know is the authorized keys file. Now this one stores client public keys on the remote server. This file is stored on the server, not on your local machine. Okay, so I want to start off by just use SSHing into a remote server using the password the usual way. So to do that, let's just, it's the syntax is SSH, the user, and then the host. So you can specify the IP address of the host name. So let's do okudave at dave.davidokwe.com. As you can see, it prompts me with a password which I have to enter. Once you've entered the password, then you're in the server, and every time that you have to essentially SSH into that host, you're going to have to keep on providing the password. Now this is not really ideal for cases where you want to automate certain things. Okay, maybe you want to copy files in a bash script or something like that. You want to set up Git and all this. You kind of want to discard this way of remoting into a server and opt for passwordless based authentication scheme, which we are going to look into very soon. Okay, so to set up our passwordless based authentication, we're going to have to create the public key pair, and we can do that using this command ssh keygen. We specify -t for the type, and then the encryption type or the protocol that we need to use. In this case, I will use RSA, but you can also use DSA or ECDSA really. So it's going to ask for where to store the public key and the private key, and by default it's going to store it in your home directory /.ssh, and then that's a directory. So I already did this previously, but I'm just going to override, and it's going to ask for a password, and you can choose to add one, or you can choose not to. Okay, now should be there. And now what you have to do is to copy this public key. The public key is the one with id-raa.pub, pub meaning public. Okay, so copy it, and then now we're going to copy this public key to a file, authorized keys, on your remote host. So let's get to the remote host here. Okay, and you're going to go to your home directory SSH, and then add it to authorized keys. Authorized keys file. Okay, paste it there, the entire thing, and that is it. So essentially, if I logged out of this server here, okay, and then SSH'd back into it, shouldn't prompt me for a password. Now it is using the public key, right, that I just shared on the remote host. So that is essentially how you set up this remote. This is how you essentially set up passwordless SSH. The other way that you can do it is instead of manually copying, you can also use SSH copy ID command. So I'm just going to, let's just delete that public key we just added, okay, and then use the SSH copy ID command. So it's, instead of SSH, just say SSH copy ID command, the rest remains username at the remote host. It's going to prompt you for a password. Enter the password, and then after that, if you just said SSH into the remote host, this time it won't ask you for the password. Okay, now if you're comfortable and quite fine with passwordless SSH, the next step is now to disable password-based SSH, okay, because now it is less secure. So you're just going to have to disable it. The way you do it is you're going to go to the SSH config file, sshd config, and you're going to turn off essentially three things. Start with use PAM. So instead of yes, you're going to change this to no. Okay, the other thing that you're going to turn off is password authentication here, where it says yes, you're going to say no, and the counterpart, which is challenge response authentication, you're going to have to say no there as well. Okay, now look for pub key authentication and make sure that the option there is set to yes. Okay, yeah, and with that done, you can restart your SSH server, and essentially there password-based authentication is no longer available on your remote system. Now make sure that you've already set up the keys up on the remote host, otherwise it will lock you out, and that's not what you want. Okay, Okay, so there now it uses SSH keys by default to log into the remote host. Okay, all right, so that is really it. This is how you set up passwordless authentication to a remote SSH server or remote server that's running your app. It's running anything. Okay, and if you like this tutorial, go ahead and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel as well to get similar videos in the future. Cool. See you guys in the next one.